Okay, Frank, thank you for being our guest after your concert.
Yeah, it's nice to be
Great
here.
concert.
Thank you. Oh, thank you very much.
You enjoyed it yourself, playing here?
Yes, it's great. I mean, we've been friends with the music meeting for many years, but this is the first time that the KLEZMATICS have actually been invited. So really glad to be at this kind of festival celebrating multicultural, fun, and experimental music and traditional music.
Yeah.
So we feel very much at home here at Music Meeting.
Okay. I saw that the audience enjoyed the concert very much. They were dancing, and
Yeah,
I think they
nice.
enjoyed it very much. Well, Frank, you did a lot. You do a lot as a musician, but I only want to limit myself to the KLEZMATICS now. Well, let's start in the beginning somewhere. When did the KLEZMATICS start?
The KLEZMATICS, we started playing together in New York. I think our first actual concert as the KLEZMATICS was in 1986.
Oh, yeah.
So over 20 years ago.
And
Our first trip to Europe was in 1988. We were invited to a German festival called Heimatklange, which was in many ways similar to this. It was reinvestigating European folk music in the diaspora, in the post-war diaspora. So they had, East European Jewish music from New York, that's us,
Yeah.
or gypsy music that had gone to other places. So it was a wonderful festival. And we also recorded our first CD at that festival. It was actually an LP back then called Schweigen ist Tot, which is Yiddish for silence equals death, and which is both the slogan of AIDS activism in the United States at that time, because that was at the peak of the AIDS crisis, which is still with us, but thank God there are drugs now for it. And so we were both talking about that contemporary problem, but also the bigger linguistic social issue of preserving this language, Yiddish, which is one of the many Jewish languages, but one that has been spoken less and less since the end of Judaism in East Europe.
But how did the musicians meet each other?
Oh, we just got together by accident, sort of in New York, because we were just people who had all moved to New York and loved this music. And it was one person meeting another person. I first met our singer, Lauren Sklamberg, who has this beautiful voice. We had both moved to New York, and we both met playing in a Balkan Serbian brass band. He was playing accordion, I was playing trumpet. And then later we were starting this klezmer group, and we were sitting at a cafe very much like this. And at the other table, I saw him. I said, hey, you're the accordion player from that Balkan thing. Do you want to join our new Jewish klezmer group? I didn't even know that A, he knew Yiddish, or B, that he was a singer. It was just an accident. So it was that kind of thing. We just kind of came together with no real plan.
And the other members,
Well, what's funny is, of the 6 people that you heard on stage, 3 of us were on the first recording we made over 20 years ago. So we don't really change that much.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the idea behind the group? I mean, you wanted to play klezmer, of course, but what is klezmer for you? You can say a lot about it, but
I have a problem with the question, what is klezmer for you? Because the definition of a word should be the definition. What we do with it is another question.
Okay.
So klezmer is, very simply, this is the instrumental music of the Jews who lived in Eastern Europe. That is klezmer. All the Jews who spoke the language Yiddish, who lived in this area, their music was klezmer. Now, very simply, in the KLEZMATICS, it's more complicated than this, but simply we had 3 phases. The first phase, we only tried to exactly imitate old klezmer recordings. We would listen to old klezmer and try to copy it as best as we could.
From your grandparents, as you once said, isn't that so?
Yeah, but actually no, because my grandparents actually were born in New York, so they didn't listen to this.
Okay.
But from the records, from the old 78s, from the old recordings,
Yeah.
and this was the days before all this, everything being available online. So there was that little secret hunting for people slipping you cassettes that they had made of some 78 they found in a used store. You know, it was very secret and fun. So the first phase, we were copying old records, and then we were kind of given a gift. We made the acquaintance of a record company in Germany called Piranha Records,
Yeah.
and the head of the record company said, listen, you guys are great, we love you, you know, we're going to put out your records, but you're young people from New York, why are you only just trying to play exactly like these old people? Why don't you put your own personality and music into what you're doing? And since this was the person paying us to record, it was like a gift, someone saying, do what you want. Normally, most people nowadays, when they give you money to record, they tell you what you can't do and what you can't do and what you can't do, and you have to make demos and everything. Here he was saying, try it. And so our next record, Rhythm and Jews, was like this wonderful explosion of energy of us trying anything we could think of. And then the next number of recordings, we really were exploring what we could do with the traditional music while we still tried to get deeper into the old music and move forward. So that was sort of the second period. And the third period started about 4 or 5 years ago. For a while, we said, we have to and this gets to your question about what klezmer is for us.
Yeah.
We said, listen, we're all very versatile musicians, but if we just start doing everything, we'll lose our identity. So we had a rule that whatever we played had to have some really exact connection to Yiddish Jewish culture, either musically or language-wise or text. Sometimes we would take Yiddish poetry and set it to music. But we didn't want to just go out and play a Balkan song or an American song or something, even though we could do that. Mm-hmm. Then we met the family of Woody Guthrie, this great American folk singer. And they basically, long story, his daughter, Nora Guthrie, says, first, my father had over 3,000 song lyrics, and we don't know what the music is. We're inviting people to write new music to his song lyrics. Mm-hmm. And second, we all in America thought Woody Guthrie, this land is your land and all that stuff, was the ultimate hobo cowboy. Turns out he lived most of his life in Brooklyn, not in the middle of the Midwest, with a Jewish wife, and his mother-in-law, his wife's mother, was a famous Yiddish poet. So he had this entire connection to the same world we worked in. When we got these lyrics of Woody Guthrie's, we decided, you know what? We don't have to write klezmer tunes. At this point, we've been together. Let's just see where the words tell us to go. And that's when we recorded 2 CDs of our music with his words. And one of these records won this Grammy Award. And I say, without any judgment, that on that record called Wonder Wheel, there's less than 5 minutes of anything that's klezmer. Mm-hmm.
I agree.
But it's all klezmatics.
So
So I guess at that point we realized that after 15, 20 years together, we have our own identity, and we don't have to always play klezmer. Of course, if you were at our concert, we played mostly klezmer because we like doing that. It's fun. But when we made those records, we said we're just going to make the best music we can.
Well, but that means that klezmer is a music one can define.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
And what are the ingredients then?
The ingredients, okay. I'll try not to get too technical.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, as with most folk musics, most, not all, the instrumental music is an imitation of the vocal music. So the roots of klezmer music come from the traditional Jewish singing. The cantor, the religious singer in the synagogue, who goes, Avinu Malkeinu, and the way he sings, da da da, those modes, the scales, the rhythms, the dance rhythms, but mostly the inflection, that kind of crying out, which is basically a literal crying out to God. This the instruments imitate that. So what are the elements? The ingredients are the scales. There are 3 or 4 certain scales. The rhythms, there's 3 or 4 main dances. You've seen them dancing in a circle at the wedding and lifting the people up in the chair. And these inflections. And those are the elements.
Mm-hmm. So there are also the there's the religious connotation.
Well, it is, klezmer comes from a people whose definition as a people, and I would get in an argument with every one of you right now, it is not a racial definition. It is a religious and linguistic definition. I suppose genetically there are certain things, as with all groups of people, that roughly marry within the group more or less. There are certain, genetic typing, but basically it is a group of people whose definition is first and foremost the religion, and secondarily the language that they spoke. The East European Jews spoke Yiddish. Mm-hmm. But as with many religiously defined groups, for hundreds, almost thousands of years, there are arguments within the group about what it means to be religious. And some of them get more fanatic, and some of them get more secular, even though they all define themselves within the group. And it's interesting, if you look at the Jewish community in, say, a small town in Poland 100 years ago, you would have all these little subgroups that had different arguments. Some were religious, some were anti-religious. Some thought that they should move to Palestine. This is well before they were Zionists, the early Zionists. Some were anti-Zionists. So then there were the labor Zionists who were opposed to the communist Zionists as opposed to the labor anti-Zionists. There were those who thought that they should go back to speaking the Hebrew language, those that thought that should speak Yiddish. They were all fighting, but this is the sign of a living community. Mm-hmm. So, and as a result, the songs that we inherit as our heritage reflect all these different traits. We were playing so fast, we wanted to play as many songs as possible. We didn't get to translate the songs for you. But most of the songs in the klezmatics repertoire at the beginning came from this socialist, kind of socialist, anti-religious, but Yiddish nationalist movement of the 1880s through the 1920s. So the last song says we're all united. It's like the French égalité, fraternité, We're all brothers, we're all sisters, we're all united together. And I love this line because it says so much, whether we are religious or leftist, we all one people. And then, as with many folk songs, over the time, people add verses. So we added verses that say we're all gay together, like King David in the Bible and Jonathan. And this is, again, an interesting reading. If you read your Bible, the Song of Songs is a love song, love poetry between King David, our greatest king, and Jonathan. And there's that famous line, my love for you is greater than my love for all women. So now the religious Jews would argue that this is all a spiritual metaphor and that they're talking about the love of God. And those of us who have other ways of looking at it say, yes, that's probably true, but it's also two men telling of their deep love for each other. So we do these readings. But this, again, is part of a living tradition that is continuously engaged in a polemical discussion with our history, not rejecting it, but not embracing a dogmatic reading of the text.
Okay.
Okay.
I want to dive deeper into it because that brings me to a quote you once did in a documentary made on Jewish music in New York. The documentary was called "Sabbath in Paradise," and I want to read this quote because I think
This was a long time ago, so
okay, but well, I'm going to ask your reaction on your own quote, but I think this is exactly the same topic that we're discussing now. So it's Frank talking now, saying, "I wonder whether the cultural side of Judaism, which now seems to exist separate from religious Judaism, and has its own history and tradition in Yichnes.
Yichnes, yeah.
Whether it could have ever developed absent of the Jewish religious life in the Pale, in East Europe."
Okay, did you all understand that?
Maybe
more or less?
Well,
the question is this. I think
yeah.
this is the question. And we spoke about this a little earlier, but now I really actually understand it. Because what I was saying first off was that as a person alive in the end of the 20th century, it's almost a postmodern view of this culture, whereas for us as people now, or for us as Jews now, we are handed a tradition that has religious tradition and a secular cultural tradition. And so that's what I was saying, this is a gift. But the question was, can the secular tradition, I think it was, I should have said it differently than the quote. The question is, will this secular Jewish tradition grow when it is no longer connected to the religious roots that gave birth to it? If you think of it like a tree, the roots are the religion. That's why, it's Jewish. Jewish is not as opposed to Dutch, it's Jewish as opposed to Christian, or Jewish as opposed to Buddhist, or it's a religious group. So you have this religion, and much of the language and culture comes from the religious practices, because, well, I don't have to explain, that's pretty obvious. So then, as we develop this secular Judaism, this secular Jewish culture that started by taking the moral ideals of Judaism and basically saying we can live this kind of positive moral way without having to absolutely believe in this God. People questioned God, basically, the existence of God. And it gave rise to the secular humanist movement. Now, I don't know if you have this term here in Holland, but this is really funny and fucked up. I can't say that on the radio. It's really kind of funny because secular humanism, I'll tell you what it is if you don't know. I think this is the most obvious and beautiful thing. Secular humanism basically says we can be good people and do good things in this world, help each other, help the planet, think about ecology, think about civil rights. We can do good things not because some deity has given us a set of rules that says you have to do this, but because we're human beings and we can think about it, and as human beings, we can choose to do good things. You would say that's pretty nice stuff. Well, do you realize that in my country, our government, the right wing, which has been controlling our government for about 15 years, has been spending billions of dollars to fight against the idea of secular humanism. They hate the idea that you can be a good person without an authority telling you that you have to be a good person.
Why do they do that? Why is that so?
Why do they do? I don't know. Because they're out of their minds?
Probably.
Because I think they want to install the idea of an authority that they can then. It's the same reason why was in Roman Catholicism, why for centuries was it illegal, not allowed, to have the Bible written in the vernacular language, so that only the people, the educated class, the priests who could read the Latin or Aramaic could tell everyone else what it meant and what they had to do. So it's a power issue. Because once you say, no, we can all understand this, or once you say, no, we can make our own choices without authority, that leads to people questioning authority. So I think it's basically a simple power thing. But back to the music. back to the music. So you have this culture. So the question is, how can we grow? And I have big problems. We were speaking about this with the idea of cultural nationalism. Did you have this expression in Holland?
Yeah.
It's from the late 60s, early 70s, the cultural nationalists. Because in a way, it's very exclusionary. It says, we have to stick together, us, whatever, fill in the blank, us Dutch people, us Ostfriesians, we have to stick together. And on one hand, it is true, because if all us little groups don't stick together, we lose these beautiful cultural artifacts that we have. We end up speaking, first one national language. What is now called Dutch used to be probably 10 smaller languages. What is called English, each French, you know what I'm saying? So sometimes you have to stick together to preserve these artifacts and to keep them going. And yet, ideologically, we are still one bigger people. So what has happened, to cut to the chase, is groups like the KLEZMATICS, we still stick, I guess, looking back at this quote 10 years later, because I think that was 10 years ago,
10 years ago,
we have proven the point that we can have a living Yiddish culture, Yiddish language, a subsect of Judaism that still maintains a relationship to the religion, but basically grows as often as not by people who are not strictly following the religion. So I guess, yes, it can exist.
Okay.
And it does.
Maybe that's a good moment to stop the interview.
Okay.
Thank you.